Our story begins with Akagami, a typical ugly idiot who's destined to have a life filled with enough plot to fill 1,000 novels, which he believes is a curse he inherited from his father, who was an infamous Riz lord that built himself a harem of his own, and even encouraged a 5-year-old Akagami to do the same.
Y'all need Jesus.
However, not wanting to become like his deadbeat dad, Akagami decided to be single forever and vowed to live a life free of temptation from his worldly desires, by focusing entirely on his studies and avoiding interacting with any women, and he even took a job at the Lonely Mart in pursuit of his noble goals. But on one fateful night, however, Akagami accidentally bumps into Yuzuki and instantly falls in love with her at first sight. And although he immediately leaves before his urges get the best of him, as the days go by, Akagami can't get impure thoughts of Yuzuki out of his mind, and he quickly spirals out of control as he goes back to partying with friends, and even creeping on women. And it doesn't take long for Akagami's whole life to collapse, as he loses his job and his grades start dropping, all because he can't stop thinking about girls. Realizing that his impure desires will soon destroy his life, Akagami concludes that the only logical thing to stop his urges from turning him into his Riz Lord father is to become a monk. And with this plan in mind, he heads deep into the Japanese countryside to find an isolated temple, where he can live free from women and earthly temptations. But when he arrives at the temple already dressed as a monk, the one who opens the door is none other than Yuzuki, so he immediately shuts the door back shut in her face, while she desperately tries to open it back up. But upon seeing his monk outfit, Yuzuki panics and immediately changes clothes, mistakenly believing him to be an important person. But as her plot bounces around like Akagami's one remaining brain cell, he's suddenly unable to control his desires any longer and spontaneously confesses his love to Yuzuki while imploring her to marry him, which of course just confuses her. Afterwards, Yuzuki takes Akagami inside to try and make sense of this situation. Meanwhile, Akagami fears that Yuzuki was brought to the temple as a test of his resolve to a life without women, which he of course obviously failed. At that same time, however, Yuzuki calls Kiki, the head priestess, and tells her that the man chosen for her arranged marriage has come a day earlier than expected, but Kiki responds that that's not possible as she's already meeting with the man now. At that moment, Tsukuyo, Yuzuki's younger sister, arrives at the temple and Yuzuki immediately warns her that they've been infiltrated by the ghost of a pervy monk, just as Akagami punches himself to keep his urges under control, before unwillingly frightening the girls with his blood-soaked face, causing the girls to kick him and run away for their lives. But at this point Akagami continues to chase after them as he desperately tries to clear up the misunderstanding. And when Mia, another resident who's minding her own business painting, gets annoyed by the loud noise, she steps outside and immediately eats an Akagami to the stomach.
Now that's a lot of damage!
And as soon as he gets back up, Akagami is knocked out by Yuzuki's palm strike. Shortly after, Kiki returns to the temple and explains that Akagami had actually applied to train as a monk without realizing that this temple was now only for nuns. Despite this, Kiki still proposes that Akagami stay with them, since she's surprisingly lazy and just wants a man around to work for free. And when the girls warn Kiki that Akagami is a dangerous ape who can't control his urges, she decides to playfully test him by undoing her kimono, prompting Akagami to immediately punch himself in the face. But when girls make it clear that none of them want Akagami to live with them, and Mia even whips out her katana ready to give him a new butt crack, Akagami realizes that he's not wanted there and leaves. But as he leaves, Yuzuki feels a bit bad for him, until she suddenly remembers having heard Akagami's name before, and realizes that he's the son of an infamous womanizer who borrowed 20 million yen from the temple before vanishing. As such, Yuzuki immediately brings Akagami back to the temple, as she declares that from now on, he'll work at the temple and repay his father's debt with his body, which completely shocks the other girls. But upon realizing her mistake, Yuzuki clarifies that from now on Akagami will work at the temple for free, which still shocks the other girls anyways, since they're completely against having a seemingly deranged man join their pure sanctuary, and they even consider just selling his organs instead to repay his debt. Later that night, however, while Yuzuki gives Akagami a tour of the temple, the other girls begin plotting to get him kicked out by seducing him until he can't control his urges anymore, and they elect Tsukuyo for the job since she has the greatest, personality. The next day, Akagami gets up at 5 a.m. and immediately gets to work cleaning the temple and cooking breakfast for the girls. Meanwhile, Tsukuyo approaches him seductively as part of the plan to get him kicked out, but in reality she doesn't know what she's doing and is secretly terrified. So instead, throughout the rest of the day she tries to bully Akagami into leaving the temple by giving him a long list of chores, but he just gleefully accomplishes every challenge thrown his way, including organizing the temple's finances, and even meditating in a super cold makeshift waterfall, which actually just makes Akagami feel like he's growing closer to enlightenment. Desperate to get him kicked out, later that day Tsukuyo brazenly walks in on Akagami while he's bathing, as she plans to join him to make his urges go crazy. But she's actually far too shy to go through with her plan, as the thought of Akagami seeing her plot embarrasses her too much. Suddenly, however, Tsukuyo stumbles and falls, while Akagami tries to save her, and ends up on top of her. But when a box then falls on his head, the two accidentally smooch, just as Yuzuki enters the bathroom. But while Tsukuyo tries to apologize and explain the misunderstanding, Yuzuki remains silent, until she calmly asks Akagami to leave. Afterwards, the girls celebrate Tsukuyo successfully getting Akagami kicked out of the temple, even though it was actually completely by accident. But despite succeeding, Tsukuyo feels kind of bad about what she did. And to make matters worse, Yuzuki avoids Tsukuyo over and over again throughout the rest of the day. But when she finally confronts Yuzuki about her socially inept behavior, Yuzuki reveals that she avoided Tsukuyo because looking at her just reminds her of seeing Akagami's impressive physique. And although the two girls clarify the misunderstanding, Kiki tells them that Akagami's room is suddenly empty, which shocks Yuzuki. Meanwhile, Akagami turns himself into the police for being a beast with uncontrollable desires, but they obviously just send this lunatic packing. And with nowhere else to go, he's forced to find refuge in a cardboard box under the bridge. But even with the very present threat of homelessness hanging over his head, Akagami can't get impure thoughts of Yuzuki and Tsukuyo out of his mind, which just confuses him, as he was sure he'd reached enlightenment by meditating under the waterfall. Thankfully, Yuzuki finds him a little while later and immediately scolds him for leaving, while explaining that when she had previously told him to leave, she obviously meant leave the bathroom, not the temple. But Akagami can barely pay attention to Yuzuki's words because the rain has made her clothes see-through. Suddenly, Tsukuyo also appears and apologizes to him with her bakery in full view, and both girls ask Akagami to return to the temple. But before they head back, Tsukuyo slips him a $50,000 invoice for taking her first kiss, while whispering that he must take responsibility. Once they return to the temple, however, the two girls head to take a bath together, while Akagami decides to prepare dinner with Kurige, Yuzuki and Tsukuyo's younger sister. But as they talk, Akagami suddenly starts daydreaming about Yuzuki again, and accidentally blurts out that he wants to get to know her more. And upon hearing this, Kurige accuses him of being a pervert, but says there's actually nothing wrong with that, as she offers to give Akagami what he's always wanted. Suddenly, she goes to open the bathroom door to expose her sister's plots, only to step aside when Akagami tries to stop her, making him accidentally open the door instead, granting him a heavenly view, of course, followed by a swift and devilish beating. And as he lays on the floor, Akagami realizes that despite looking innocent, Kurige is actually diabolical. The next day, Mia declares that she will handle Akagami herself once and for all, and challenges him to a sword duel, since Akagami can't seem to keep his tiny katana to himself. And at first, Akagami thinks Mia is joking and doesn't take the duel seriously, but when she nearly strikes him, he realizes just how serious she is, and he immediately throws his sword away as he doesn't want to hurt her, and instead plans to stop Mia's sword strike with his bare hands, but accidentally ends up grabbing her plot armor instead, which actually proves to be a much more efficient technique as it embarrasses Mia so much that she forfeits the duel. As such, Kagura decides that Mia should be punished for losing and shows them a book of ancient punishments, which is jam-packed full of wild and scandalous depictions that leave Mia's face beet red. Meanwhile, however, Akagami realizes that this book is a perfect chance to punish himself and keep his impure desires under control. So when Akagami points to the book and enthusiastically proclaims that he wants to try many things from it at night, Mia misunderstands and thinks he's talking about trying things with her, and immediately runs away embarrassed. But later that night, Mia goes to Akagami's room to fulfill her punishment, and climbs on top of him, which just confuses Akagami. And although Mia is as red as a tomato, she gives him permission to do whatever he wants with her. And thinking that this is a dream, Akagami nearly gives in to his earthly desires, until he spots Kagura in the corner just casually recording them, and realizes that Mia has misinterpreted her punishment. But upon realizing her mistake, Mia immediately runs away again. Akagami then goes to Mia's room to clear things up, but Kagura locks them in, forcing them to talk things through. However, Mia has no intentions of talking with Akagami and just gives him the cold shoulder. But when she actually gets cold and Akagami tries to give her a blanket, she immediately pushes him away while shouting that if he gets too close she won't be able to control her impure desires, while tears stream down her face. Once she's calmed down, Mia reveals that she actually grew up in a rich family, but came to Japan so she could change her personality and stop being overwhelmed by her urges, and so she would never become like her mother, who had many lovers. Suddenly, Akagami starts to cry as he and Mia are in the same situation, and he's finally found someone who understands him. Shocked by this revelation, Mia believes this must be fate, and the two simultaneously agree to become allies in their search for enlightenment, even if their urges get in the way. And at that same moment, Kagura finally unlocks the door and reveals that she's found the perfect punishment for them. And the next day, Yuzuki is surprised to find Kagura recording something from outside Mia's room, but is even more shocked when she finds Akagami and Mia blushing and cheerful, sweating and panting from all the extraneous effort it takes to play Twister, the punishment Kagura chose. But unbeknownst to them, from Yuzuki's angle, it looks like they're doing something far worse. And at the end of the day, Yuzuki punishes Akagami by forcing him to meditate and repent. However, when Kiki reminds Yuzuki that her arranged marriage meeting is today, Yuzuki realizes that she'd completely forgotten and is late, so Akagami takes her running to the bus station. But on the way there, these idiots mistake a moving truck for their bus and climb into the back. But despite being morons, Akagami keeps their spirits up by promising to get Yuzuki to her date on time, and even helps her put on her kimono. And in an unexpected turn of events, Akagami stealthily steals the truck, and thanks to Akagami's insane driving, they manage to barely make it there on time, but only after Akagami crashed into a tree and nearly killed them both. But while Yuzuki goes on ahead, a nun mistakes Akagami for a temple monk due to his attire, and promptly assigns him various chores to do. Meanwhile, Yuzuki finally meets Juan, the man she is supposed to marry in order to save the temple since it doesn't have enough money to stay open for much longer. But as she explains the situation at the temple, she's distracted by Akagami staring intensely at her as her beauty has awakened his worldly desires. But just as she tries to ignore Akagami's gaze and focus on her conversation with Juan, Akagami punches himself in the face to stop his urges. Just then, the nun informs Akagami that the matchmaker has fallen ill, and Akagami awkwardly finds himself tasked with overseeing the date between Juan and Yuzuki. But as the two ask questions about each other's relationship goals, Akagami can't help but imagine himself in those scenarios with Yuzuki. And when Juan reveals his desire to have 10 children, Akagami's imagination runs so wild that he faints. Moments later, Juan reveals that he actually already knew that Akagami was Yuzuki's friend. And upon hearing this, Yuzuki decides to come clean, and confesses to Juan that she has no intention of marrying, as her real aspiration is to become a nun and take charge of the temple like her mother before her. But in response, however, when Juan lists all the reasons why Yuzuki's beloved temple should be closed, she can't find any reason to argue otherwise. But upon hearing Juan's harsh but true words, Akagami immediately regains consciousness and begs Juan to help the temple, even though the temple shutting down would clear Akagami's debt. And when Juan gets serious and says that taking care of a temple is difficult work, Akagami earnestly proclaims that he'll stay by Yuzuki's side forever, through sickness and in health, to make sure that the temple flourishes, which just embarrasses Yuzuki beyond words. But thanks to Akagami's efforts, Juan accepts Yuzuki's engagement proposal as he leaves. Afterwards, Yuzuki and Akagami have difficulty returning to the temple since they have missed the bus, and there are no taxis either, so since this is Japan they have no choice but to spend the night in a love hotel obviously. Akagami tries to stay calm, but Yuzuki gets carried away and gets all excited about all the things the couple's room has to offer, which completely shocks Akagami, so he decides to take a bath to calm his nerves. But when he gets out, he spots Yuzuki awkwardly shutting off the TV before she heads to take a bath. But it doesn't take long for Akagami to realize that while he was bathing, Yuzuki was watching a video that is normally meant for adults if you catch my Tokyo drift, which proves to Akagami that even Yuzuki has urges. However, this realization only leads to his inner angel and inner devil battling it out for victory over what little sanity Akagami has left. But in the end his urges prove too hard to control and Akagami is forced to take desperate measures to keep his beloved Yuzuki safe. Meanwhile, Yuzuki worries that she might have given Akagami the wrong idea by bringing him to a love hotel. But when she suddenly remembers the promise Akagami made to always be by her side, she decides that if it's with him, then going along with their urges for one night wouldn't be so bad. But once she steps out of the bath, she finds Akagami chained up to the wall as he vows to protect her from his urges. And upon seeing this ridiculous scene, Yuzuki simply blindfolds Akagami and quietly heads to bed, while Akagami screams out in confusion, unaware that he just missed his chance to level up as a man. The next day before school, Tsukuyo warns Yuzuki that it's crucial that no one discovers Akagami is living with them since it could start rumors. But it seems it's already too late, as once they arrive at school, Tsukuyo's friends eagerly inform her about rumors of her kissing a guy in monk's clothes under a bridge. But rather than refute this, Tsukuyo accidentally blurts out that she didn't kiss him under a bridge, inadvertently confirming that she really did kiss some guy. And to make matters worse, Tsukuyo spots Akagami at school, delivering the lunchbox she had forgotten at home, and immediately panics. She then places a bag over her head so she won't be recognized, despite her massive bazookas making her pretty easy to identify, and immediately knocks Akagami unconscious. When he then wakes up in the infirmary moments later, he's shocked to find a creep in a paper bag silently watching him. But as soon as Tsukuyo reveals herself, her friends enter the infirmary, prompting her to hide Akagami's body under hers on the bed. Sensing their suspicions, however, Tsukuyo squeezes Akagami even more tightly to look more natural, inadvertently causing him to ironically suffocate in between her massive airbags, which of course just embarrasses Tsukuyo even more. Thankfully, Tsukuyo's friends leave shortly after, and Akagami survives his brief trip to heaven. And afterwards, Akagami assures Tsukuyo that he'll handle all the housework at the temple, so that she can rejoin the archery club without worry. That night, however, Tsukuyo reflects on her past, and remembers joining the archery club because she admired Yuzuki. But after Yuzuki quit the club to take care of the temple, Tsukuyo followed suit, leaving behind her passion for archery. The next day, Tsukuyo decides to go for a walk to clear her mind, and without realizing it, she finds herself walking towards the archery club, where she is flooded with memories of the good times she spent there. However, she was completely unaware of the fact that Akagami had been following her like a creep this whole time. And upon realizing this, she hastily runs away, as she fears that more rumors will spread if they're seen together. But when they reach the river, she confesses to Akagami that she left the archery club because she feels an overwhelming sense of guilt about Yuzuki's situation, since Yuzuki had to leave the club to take care of the temple, while Tsukuyo remained in the club enjoying herself. But while Akagami understands her emotions, he insists that Tsukuyo's feelings are misguided. And upon returning to the temple, they are surprised to find Yuzuki practicing archery with her bow, and as they watch her demonstrate her lack of skill, they realize that that is why she left the club, causing Tsukuyo to feel like a complete idiot, since her love for Yuzuki blinded her and made her believe she was proficient in archery. Yuzuki then reassures Tsukuyo that she actually enjoys taking care of the temple, despite the difficulties, and encourages her to pursue her own desires without worrying about the family's issues. Later that night, Tsukuyo shares with Akagami her decision to return to the archery club, but also asks him why he chose to help her. In response, Akagami explains that due to his father's reputation, he was restricted from doing many things he loved, and does not want anyone else to experience that. The next day, Tsukuyo deliberately leaves her lunchbox behind, and immediately upon noticing this, Akagami goes to deliver it to the archery club. Tsukuyo's friends automatically assume that he's Tsukuyo's boyfriend, but she blushingly clarifies that he's just a part of her family. Days later, Yuzuki steps onto the scale and is astonished by the numbers she sees, and she exclaims to the other girls that the scale must be cursed, which they quickly agree to as the other fatties weigh themselves and see equally disappointing numbers. And as they try to understand why, they quickly realize that their food intake has increased significantly since Akagami has arrived because his cooking is simply irresistible. Sometime later that day, the girls decide to start exercising in an attempt to shed the extra weight, but when they begin their exercise routine, they find themselves quickly exhausted. So they conclude it would be easier to just eat healthier instead, but they feel completely embarrassed about asking Akagami to cook diet food for them. Kurage, however, surprises them by brazenly admitting that she loves his cooking, and wishes he would never leave the temple, and even goes as far as suggesting that one of them should marry Akagami to ensure he stays with them forever, which immediately flusters the other girls. Just then, Akagami enters the room carrying a tray of Japanese sweets, and despite their intentions to lose weight, none of the girls can resist gobbling them all up. Later that night, Kurage writes in her diary about how Akagami has brought positive changes to the temple, and even wonders if he would be willing to wait until she's an adult to marry her. The next day, Yuzuki asks Akagami to include pickled radishes in her food from now on, but noticing her seemingly bad mood, Akagami prepares the best lunch for her that he's ever made. However, Yuzuki eats it with a straight face, which deeply saddens Akagami as he believes she no longer enjoys his cooking. But later that day, Akagami finds Yuzuki training with Kiki to become the head of the temple, and he realizes that Yuzuki's serious demeanor and preference for radishes are all a part of Yuzuki's training regimen. This revelation relieves Akagami, and when Kiki offers to train him as well, he gladly accepts, much to Yuzuki's delight. Suddenly, Mia appears and eagerly requests to be trained as well, which Kiki agrees to. But first, they must all undergo rigorous training to become monks, as they're currently just considered normal people living in a temple, which demoralizes Akagami as he believed he was already a monk. Because of this, he fears that his dirty thoughts might surface again, prompting Kiki to hug him tightly as she reassures him that she'll teach him to master his urges, while Mia complains that that should be her job. Once the gang finally start their monk training, however, it quickly proves to be far more challenging than they ever anticipated. For starters, Mia and Yuzuki are forced to wear uncomfortable monk clothes without anything underneath. And next, they must meditate intensely for hours on end. And although Akagami initially excels at deep meditation, he becomes distracted by the girls' pained moans when they are struck for losing focus, which leads to Akagami being struck too as the moans flood his mind with impure thoughts. And as quirky accidents and plot-filled moments continue to happen throughout the rest of the day, Akagami is chastised and beaten by Yuzuki. Later that night, Akagami and Mia apologize to Yuzuki for always getting in the way of her training, and promise to focus harder from now on. However, their night training proves to be just as challenging, as Kiki informs them that the three of them must sleep in the same room together, because this is part of monk training for some reason, and as a result, none of them manage to get any sleep at all. The next day, Kiki escalates their training by locking them in a small room in order for them to develop resistance to the opposite gender. And within just a second of being stuck with the girls, Akagami immediately feels as though he's caught between heaven and hell, and nearly passes out from all the nosebleeds. But as the girls encourage him to give it his all, Akagami tries to distract himself by talking about all the training they've done so far. But as they talk, Mia accidentally blurts out that she couldn't sleep the previous night because of Akagami's sexy Adam's apple. Those are her words, not mine, and in response, Akagami unwillingly blurts out that his tiny katana kept him awake all night. Meanwhile, Yuzuki's face is bright red, but she still claims that she has no impure thoughts or hidden desires. But despite her words, Yuzuki can't help but be constantly distracted by thoughts of Akagami's body, and she feels jealous whenever she sees him interact with Mia. Afterwards, Kiki confronts them about their training, and declares that those who claim not to have hidden desires often have the most twisted minds, leaving Akagami and Mia stunned as they stare at Yuzuki, who continues to deny having any hidden desires. In the afternoon, Kiki announces that it's time to rest, as she recognizes that they've been training intensely. But while Mia eagerly heads off to spend time with Kagura, Akagami dreads the free time because he suddenly remembers that today is Christmas Eve, a time where his father would lose all restraint and invite all his lovers to spend the night with him, a memory that haunts him profoundly since he overheard everything from the other room. But upon hearing this, Yuzuki decides to take him to the city, hoping to create new Christmas Eve memories to overshadow the painful ones. And as they wander through the bustling streets, the festive atmosphere begins to lift Akagami's spirits, and the two spend a wholesome evening together with surprisingly no fanservice, unless you count banging a wall. The next day, as the temple fills with the spirit of Christmas, the girls reflect on how much they've changed since Akagami arrived, and express their happiness at having changed their minds about expelling him from the temple. However, Kagura secretly still harbors the desire to see him gone, as she quietly schemes from the shadows like some supervillain mastermind. On Christmas Day, the girls celebrate with festive cheers, despite living in a temple. Meanwhile, Akagami seizes the moment to prepare a grand Christmas banquet, as a gesture of gratitude for everything the girls have done for him. After the meal, Yuzuki explains that they have a tradition of exchanging gifts randomly with one another, which suddenly makes Akagami panic, since he had bought a specific gift just for her. And in his panic, he contemplates just offering the girls his organs to sell on the black market. However, the girls reassure him that he can just gift a coupon to fulfill any one request they have, which Kurage desperately wants to receive. And when it's Yuzuki's turn to open her gift, she's shocked to find a marriage certificate, which Kurage had hoped for Akagami to receive. Meanwhile, Kagura receives Akagami's coupon, while Akagami receives hers, which turns out to be a DVD containing cultured pictures of Mia. But while Yuzuki reassures Mia that Akagami would never actually use the DVD, Akagami desperately tries to resist the urge to watch it, but is ultimately forced to hand it over to Yuzuki. Later on, as Christmas Day comes to an end, Yuzuki and Akagami find themselves alone, and she thanks him for bringing joy back to Christmas. In response, Akagami says that this is the best Christmas he has ever experienced thanks to Yuzuki and the others, and taking advantage of their alone time, they decide to exchange the gifts they bought for one another. But it turns out that they both chose prayer beads, a deeply symbolic gift, since when a Buddhist couple marries, the bride and groom exchange prayer beads instead of rings, a realization which causes both of them to blush furiously. The next day, the gang heads to a luxurious hot spring to relax, as part of Kagura's Christmas present to the family. But while the girls get ready to enter the baths, Akagami is swiftly separated from the group by the staff, who present him with a welcome drink, which, unbeknownst to him, is secretly laced with something to make his urges crazier, before then being led to the hot springs. Meanwhile, the girls begin to enjoy the soothing waters of the hot springs. But on the other hand, a panicked Akagami is hiding behind the bushes because he was mistakenly taken to the wrong bath and absolutely fears getting caught in such an incriminating position. Suddenly, Kagura enters the hot springs and immediately notices Akagami, but instead of helping him, she decides to play along and tease him by asking the girls what they would do if Akagami sneaked in to peep on them. And although the girls initially express anger, Kagura fuels the fire even more and tries to make them angrier. But after thinking about it some more, the girls conclude that if something like that happened, they would first listen to Akagami's explanation. And upon hearing this, Akagami starts to cry with relief as he decides to announce his presence and explain the misunderstanding, which completely shocks the girls. Afterwards, the girls initially scold him for the situation but quickly forgive him, since they're touched by his willingness to come forward, while also admiring his impressive physique. Afterwards, the girls decide to return to the temple, but Mia decides to stay back with Kagura, and when Akagami also expresses his desire to leave, Kagura forces him to stay as well by pointing out that his katana hasn't calmed down yet. Moments later, Akagami goes to take an indoor bath. Suddenly, however, Kagura appears and offers to help him. Akagami immediately tries to escape, but Kagura persists, and with his sanity hanging by a thread, he resorts to hitting himself between his legs. Damn! Which proves to be a painful but effective way to maintain his resolve and avoid succumbing to Kagura's feminine riz. Seeing that her plan has failed, Kagura decides to reveal that she's masterminded everything that happened to Akagami today to get him kicked out of the temple, as she reveals her ultimate plan to turn Mia into the queen of plot and culture by having her be with at least 100 Japanese men. Huh? At that same time, Mia walks in and sees the two of them together, and seizing the moment, Kagura hypnotizes both Mia and Akagami to sleep. When Akagami wakes up moments later, he finds himself tied to a chair, with Kagura standing before him, declaring that her family has always been the obedient servants of Mia's family. And although Akagami is bound, he earnestly tells Kagura that her loyalty should be to Mia, not the twisted ambitions of their families. But just as Akagami finishes, Kagura makes him an irrefutable offer. If he agrees to leave the temple, she will pay off all of his debts. And although the offer is tempting, it weighs heavily on Akagami's mind as he knows that accepting it would mean abandoning Mia to a fate she doesn't want. The next day, Akagami can't stop thinking about Kagura's offer, but he still tries to focus on the day's tasks anyways, which is to prepare mochi. But when Kagura claims that the correct way to make mochi is for the girls to dress as bunnies while Akagami helps them from behind. Suddenly, Akagami finds himself in a bizarre situation, first holding Mia, who's dressed in a bunny suit that Akagami enjoys a bit too much. Shortly after, Kurige suddenly appears, also dressed as a bunny. And upon seeing this scene, Yuzuki becomes furious, assuming it was Akagami's idea to dress the girls in such an indecent manner. A few days later, they all go to the shrine to give thanks and ask for blessings for the new year. Akagami, concerned about possible rivalries between shrines and temples, insists that everyone wear masks and sunglasses. However, Yuzuki reassures him that such rivalries are a thing of the past. And while the other girls enjoy guessing their future and eating food, Yuzuki quietly shares her hopes with Akagami as she wishes they can come together every year and expresses her desire to protect the temple. Suddenly, Akagami realizes what he must do and runs off to find Kagura. Meanwhile, Kagura reflects on how her friendship with Mia began. At that time, Kagura saw that Mia opposed her family's strict philosophy and decided to use reverse psychology to subtly convince her to flee to Japan. But just as Mia began to find her footing, her mother demanded that Kagura complete a proof of Mia's dedication to the family's philosophy by having Mia create plot with over 100 men. but sadly none of them me. Just then, Akagami confronts her, decisively declining her offer to leave the temple, and declares that he will not abandon his promise to always support Yuzuki, and he's committed to completing the training alongside Mia. But when Kagura hears this, anger flares up within her as she knows that Akagami loves Yuzuki and fears that their future together will leave Mia heartbroken. In a fit of rage, she kicks him between the legs and storms out. But when she then returns to the group, Mia hugs Kagura tightly as she exclaims how dependable of a friend Kagura is. The next day, Akagami is woken up by Yuzuki, who tells him that she and Kiki are leaving. However, Mia and Kagura are still there, which terrifies Akagami as his nuts tremble with fear each time Mia mentions Kagura's name. Sensing the awkward tension between them, Mia decides to help Akagami and Kagura become friends by locking them together in the warehouse. Initially, Kagura considers seducing Akagami. Days later, Tsukuyo wakes up tightly hugging Kurage, as she once again dreamt that she was married to Akagami. When she then goes downstairs and finds Aka preparing breakfast with Mia, Tsukuyo wonders how they became so close. Meanwhile, Kagura starts showing her videos of Akagami and Mia together, but the poorly recorded and dark footage makes it appear as though they're engaged in indecent activities, which completely flusters Tsukuyo, even though they were actually just playing Twister. At that same time, Mia inadvertently admits her attraction to Akagami, as she claims this makes them perfect training partners for resisting their urges, which just infuriates an already jealous Tsukuyo. Afterwards, Tsukuyo questions Mia about her feelings for Akagami, but Mia insists that he's only her training partner, as they both struggle against their inner desires. However, she soon begins to describe Akagami's perfect body and ends by expressing her desire to spend the rest of her life by his side, which once again just embarrasses and infuriates Tsukuyo, who wishes she could be as honest about her feelings. But despite this, Mia still adamantly denies that Akagami is anything more than a training partner. Later that night, Akagami visits Yuzuki's room to talk with her, but is completely shocked when Yuzuki opens the door dressed as a maid and invites him in. But as he struggles to avert his gaze like any other mortal man would, he requests to borrow her cell phone so he can apply for a part-time job, which Yuzuki firmly refuses, as she insists that the temple is her responsibility. But as they argue and Akagami tries his best to keep his blood from spilling out completely, he eventually reaches his limit and tells her to look in the mirror. Just then, she blushes deeply upon realizing how revealing the maid outfit is, and embarrassingly explains that the outfit belongs to her friend but she borrowed it to see if she felt comfortable working in it. As the tension eases, Akagami starts massaging her back, as working too many part-time jobs has started to take a toll on her. However, the massage feels so good that Yuzuki can't help but let out weird noises, which sends Akagami's mind spiraling with more and more devious ideas as he increases the intensity of the massage. However, Tsukuyo overhears these weird noises and bursts into the room, catching the two in a completely bizarre position. And to make matters even more confusing for her, as Akagami exits Yuzuki's room, he invites Tsukuyo to go shopping with him tomorrow, which she misinterprets as a date, leading to her having a dream later that night about eventually becoming Akagami's wife. The next day, Tsukuyo meticulously dresses up and makes herself pretty in hopes of impressing Akagami. But when Akagami sees her, he casually mentions that he just needs her help to buy a cell phone plan that's cheaper for couples, much to her disappointment, but she still decides to go with him even though she knows it's not a date. And after receiving their cell phone plans, Tsukuyo musters up the courage to ask Akagami out on a real date. But just then, she loses her nerve and instead just asks to exchange cell phone numbers, which he agrees to. But when Akagami mentions needing a cell phone for secret activities, referring to part-time jobs, Tsukuyo's imagination runs wild and she begins fantasizing about him sending her messages to meet in her room at night. Later that night, however, she really does receive a message from Akagami, which makes her heart pound with anticipation. But when she opens it, she quickly realizes that he was simply thanking her for her help today. The next day, Yuzuki awkwardly tries to pretend that she didn't see Akagami and Tsukuyo yesterday returning from what appeared to be a date. But she completely fumbles in her attempts at nonchalance, and when Akagami tries to speak with her, she hastily runs away from him. Meanwhile, Kiki, noticing the tension between them, decides that Yuzuki will not receive any training today, and instead tasks her with discovering the underlying reasons for the tension. Moments later, Yuzuki decides to take a nap, and as she dreams she reminisces about her childhood ambitions of running the temple, though she struggles to remember why she wanted to in the first place. Afterwards, Yuzuki heads to the kitchen and asks the other girls if there are any household chores to be done, but they inform her that Akagami has already taken care of everything. Moreover, they mention that he and Kiki have gone off to handle something secretive. Meanwhile, Tsukiyo grumbles that Akagami isn't responding to her text messages, which just makes the other girls jealous that they don't have his phone number. Elsewhere, Akagami earnestly begs Kiki to resume Yuzuki's training, but Kiki remains resolute in her refusal. Suddenly, Akagami's phone rings, and Tsukiyo's frantic voice informs him that Yuzuki has disappeared. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushes out into the pouring rain to search for her. He searches tirelessly, scouring every possible place until, out of nowhere, he remembers to check under the bridge. Moments later, he finds Yuzuki curled up in a box beneath the bridge, completely soaked, as Yuzuki reveals that her mind suddenly became flooded with negative thoughts, recalling her mother's harsh words about her inability to care for the temple no matter how hard she tried. Seeing Yuzuki in such a state, Akagami's eyes swell up with tears. He instinctively embraces her, offering the comfort she desperately needs, and as she clings to him, she slowly passes out. When she reawakens, she realizes that Akagami had stayed by her side all night. She then asks him how he found her, and he explains that while seeking solitude in the past, he once took refuge under the same bridge. And while Akagami understands her desire to isolate herself, he also expresses his wish to be part of her life instead. Overwhelmed with emotion, Yuzuki starts to cry as she confesses that she feels responsible for burdening him with so much housework while she accomplishes so little. Akagami gently reassures her, however, by explaining that he does everything out of love for the temple, which makes Yuzuki finally remember why she wanted to take charge of the temple since she was a little girl, because she loves it deeply. And she thanks Akagami for reminding her of her true passion and purpose. The girls then suddenly burst in and begin to scold Yuzuki for isolating herself, emphatically telling her that they too will help share the burden of temple duties. At that same time, Kiki enters the room, and Yuzuki immediately pleads with her to train her again, as she admits that she temporarily lost sight of her true goals. And upon seeing her heartfelt sincerity, Kiki approves and tells her that once she recovers she can resume her training. And in the next few days everything returns to normal, with Akagami taking care of the temple, while the girls continue bickering to be the top waifu in his harem. Meanwhile, Yuzuki tells Akagami that she trusts him completely, giving him a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Thanks for watching.
Take you